Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. The Giants have fired Brian Daboll, and we knew that this was going to happen. It was inevitable, but I think most of us predicted that it would happen at the end of the season. But they pulled the plug on Daboll now after a 2-8 start to this 2025 season, and the last three seasons have started at 2-8. He's 11-33 as head coach in the last three seasons, and overall 20-40-1. Obviously, that's a 333 win percentage, and then again in the last three seasons, that's a 250 winning percentage. So, simply put, Brian Daboll lost a lot of games, and we're going to discuss a lot of things here. First, we're going to keep it with Brian Daboll. By the way, Mike Kafka has been named interim head coach. Of course, the offensive coordinator under Daboll, and his role has kind of changed a bit. As far as, originally, obviously, he was calling plays that Daboll took over, and that's a whole discussion as far as Daboll's concerned. But Joe Schoen is still the GM, and that's the biggest shame, no pun intended, in it all. And it sounds as if Joe Schoen will be leading the head coaching search, as was put out by the Giants. Kind of, they did so in a way that wasn't really easily visible. Like you had to click on the article, click on basically the link to the Brian Daboll firing to find it. It's just typical Giant ways. That's just, beyond frustrating. But besides that, we're going to discuss Joe Schoen a little bit, but he needs to be let go. Plain and simple. Joe Schoen cannot be here going into the offseason. Fine. Obviously, he's going to be here for the rest of this regular season. And sadly, I think beyond that, which would be a fucking absolute mistake. And, you can find Brian Daboll, you can do that all you want. As long as Joe Schoen is still the one calling the shots, this team is going absolutely nowhere. This roster is terrible. And that's just not going to magically change all of a sudden. Sure, you now have a really, a promising young quarterback who, by the way, Brian Daboll was the one who was banging on the table to make sure that happened. I'm sure Joe Schoen obviously was in agreement with it, but Daboll was the catalyst as to why Jackson Dart is even on this team in the first place. But let's just kind of start from the beginning, and then we'll work our way more as it pertains to, the future and with Joe Schoen. Brian Daboll, the start was really, really impressive. Won head coach of the year in 2022. 9-7-1 record. Won a playoff game at Minnesota before losing handily to the Eagles in the divisional round. What a fall from grace. And look, he's never dealt with he's never dealt with a really great roster. And in part, that was, what was inherited from Dave Gettleman. Although, ironically, if we're not going to include Jackson Dart, really still two of the best players on this team, Dexter Lawrence, who has had a definite down year for sure, and Andrew Thomas are arguably still your two best players on the team, which again came before Joe Schoen. But anyway, really did an excellent job. And with Daniel Jones as well. Now, the Daniel Jones story ends up not being such a good one as it pertains to Brian Daboll, but that was a really good year. A very solid year. It wasn't like it was some prolific season for Daniel Jones, but it led to Jones getting that contract from the Giants. When going into that 2022 season, it looked like Jones was more likely on the outs, if anything. So for the good thing, Brian Daboll, the good things that he provided was he really is a very talented offensive mind. Now, maybe was it somewhat overrated coming from Buffalo and all the Josh Allen talk? Maybe a little bit, but really this is someone that you have not seen the last of. Brian Daboll, at the very least, as an offensive coordinator. There's value there, and he adjusted a lot because the Giants had different quarterbacks. Daniel Jones got hurt a bunch, so there was Tyrod Taylor, there was Tommy DeVito, Drew Lock, and then of course Russell Wilson and Jackson Dart. And through it all, Daboll did a pretty good job of adjusting game plan. Now, and obviously Mike Kafka is like a part of this conversation as well. And, Daboll took over play calling duties from Kafka in 23, and then Kafka got it back, last season, I believe, he lost it for like at least a year. And But either way, some of that, it's not so much semantics, but again, they're kind of grouped in it together a little bit. Um, but then the losing really starts to hit, and not just losing, but bad relationships with coordinators. I mean, Wink Martindale comes in 22 and 23. He was the defensive coordinator, um, and was pretty good. I mean, 22 was good, and this is coming off Patrick Graham and the Joe Judge era. Like, Giants had um, a few defensive coordinators there that were fairly highly thought of across the league. Now, Wink Martindale, look, I think Martindale and Daboll were both at fault as far as just them clashing. Martindale is a fiery personality as well as Daboll. And that becomes a drama-filled situation at the end of the 2023 season, leading to Martindale kind of leaving. There was really no other choice, but for him to walk away. And so that was a bad look for Daboll. And there's just been a lot of unprofessionalism from Brian Daboll. Jumping way ahead here, just all the freakouts on the sidelines. And again, there's a part of it that I appreciate, but it's not ideal. As well, you have the blue tent incident in the Thursday night win over the Eagles, where he's fined $100,000 for breaking the rules. You're not supposed to do that. It's not in compliance with the procedures that they do. And he wanted to check on Jackson Dart and just kind of, freaked out because he couldn't handle a couple plays of Russell Wilson being in there, which says a lot. But I think that with Daboll, player development wasn't great. Now, again, I kind of put that more on Shane as far as just simply not having a great roster, but part of it is players maybe had okay rookie years, and then there's many players that and then got kind of worse, stalled out basically over time. But yeah, you have a 6-11 season 2, coming off of coach of the year. Like, the seat wasn't really hot at that point. It wasn't a great year, and again, you had the Martindale stuff. Like, some things weren't really great, but in a lot of ways, like the fact that he was able to get wins at a time with DeVito, as frustrating as it was for me, kind of wanted him to have a better draft position at that point with, the likes of Drake May, Jade Daniels potentially available. It was frustrating, but like from a Daboll perspective, like just the fact that he was able to kind of keep things somewhat afloat, despite, Daniel Jones being hurt and Tyrod Taylor as well, was all right. But when you go into 2024 and, at that point, Daniel Jones is, again, everything's always kind of like, it's a loyalty thing with John Mara, and it kind of goes on down where it feels okay, like this person's kind of, it's their last stand. And that was kind of Daniel Jones going into 2024. After knowing, with the Hard Knocks situation, it was just obvious anyway that the Giants wanted to potentially trade up and get a Drake May, for example. They wanted a new quarterback. Daniel Jones, really had a rough 2023 via injuries and just kind of ineffective play as well. And 2024, it only got worse. It ends up in a 3-14 2023 season. Sorry, 2024 season for Brian Daboll, which is obviously horrific, to the point where it really was and should have been that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll were fired after last season. That is what should have happened, and they didn't do it. They decided to keep things the same, and then you go into 2025 in this predicament where, you're kind of on the hot seat right away, especially in the case of Daboll. Not in the case of Shane, which it should be, but certainly Brian Daboll. And going back to the defensive coordinator front with Martindale, the fallout of that is that they sort of reluctantly hire Shane Bowen. Options weren't great. Quite frankly, you're not going to get, like with the situation that was with Martindale, you're not going to get people really clamoring for that job. So it's a little bit on both sides. And so Shane Bowen gets the job he's not done well at all. And it's ironic that he's still around past Daboll. I mean, Shane Bowen, that's a foregone conclusion. He'll probably survive the season. I don't know if we can say that for sure. I think that they want to kind of lighten the load for Kafka. I think that's part of it. Again, I don't really agree with it. I don't think Shane Bowen should keep his job, but that has not worked out. And it's not surprising. Shane Bowen, he was like the Giants' third or fourth choice. But better coordinators chose other places. And so that's part of it. But last year was an absolute disaster, which should have led to heads rolling, including Daboll and Shane as well. That should have been a package deal. They came in together. They should have left together. And then this season, really bad in terms of these late game collapses. Obviously, that falls on Brian Daboll, among many others. Again, this is not a good roster. You know, Shane Bowen is not a good defensive coordinator, but at the end of the day, the win-loss record, like Brian Daboll, like he deservedly is fired, right? You know, I just think that he shouldn't be alone in that. But you know, Dallas game, Denver game, Chicago game, and that was it. And maybe those reports were true, that they were ready to kind of get rid of him after the Denver game, and cooler heads prevailed, and they decided not to. But don't expect the rest of the season to look really any different than it did the first 10 games. The last 7 games, the only reason why it could look a little bit different is that the 4 games after the bye is a little bit easier on the schedule side. It just is. I mean, you know, like the Giants won't be facing as tough competition the last 4 or so games. And so that could lead to some bullshit wins, which could maybe save jobs or maybe not. Like, you know what the scary thing is? The Giants could finish 2-15, which they won't. They won't. They're going to win some games here. It's just the way it goes. And Joe Schoen could still be safe. That's the scary thing. But I still would tell Giant fans, and I've kind of been a ringleader in this, and it's not something I'm proud of, but you need the Giants to lose and lose regularly and lose convincingly, because it's the only chance that Joe Schoen will be let go, and it's what's needed. And this is coming from someone who was a proponent of Joe Schoen being hired. I really was a fan of the Shane Daboll hiring, and only furthered by the really great 2022 season. Like, that was validated. And then it just totally went downhill. Not to say that Joe Schoen was doing bad things from the get-go. I mean, look at some of those draft classes. 2022, which was really bad. 2023, which was actually somehow worse. And 2024, like, even that one, like, that's looking worse than it originally did. It's still decent, but it's looking worse, and that's what's happened a lot. 2023 looked okay right away. These draft classes get overhyped, and that's probably a thing across the league. And then slowly but surely, it's like, wait a minute, this is actually really bad. The Giants are not in a good cap situation. Like, the Giants have not gotten better since Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have got here. It's neutral, if anything. And again, like 2022, which was an outlier, like, credit should be given, but let's be honest with that as well. Half of that roster was inherited. So I think Daboll did a fantastic job that year, really, because he's never dealt with a great roster. But he also deserves to be let go. The record speaks for itself. Some of the non-X's and O's stuff was not good for Brian Daboll at all. Like I said, just unprofessionalism, bad relationships with coordinators, lack of player development. Of course, like the Blue Tent thing was just crazy, among many other things, and late game collapses. Like, he had to go, but that press release should have said Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll is the only one that's gone. Everyone else is still here. Mike Kafka, who really is someone that I think is a riser. Like, he was with the Kansas City Chiefs in their organization for 5 seasons, 2017 to 2021, eventually leading him to being the QB coach. And he is credited with, obviously it's kind of like the Brian Daboll, Josh Allen thing. Mike Kafka with Pat Mahomes, where obviously Mahomes is fantastic and probably didn't need Kafka, but it is something that is part of the resume and something that, you can't take away from Kafka. He certainly helped a young Mahomes become what he became. And I think Mahomes even would give Kafka that credit as well. Not only that, of course, Andy Reid being the main one, but Kafka was, in that Andy Reid tree. Kafka was an Eagles draft pick and, played a little bit with the Eagles, I think, in 2011. That was didn't have much of an NFL career, hung around, kind of bounced around, but never really had meaningful opportunities. But this is a chance for him, but one that I really, really don't want Mike Kafka to be the 20. I mean, look, unless it's just a major turnaround, which I just don't see how that's possible. I don't look at this and say, okay, Mike Kafka's a real candidate to be the 2026 head coach of the New York Giants. You look at the interim head, which is rare. I mean, honestly, there's not that many in-season NFL firings. It happens in other sports, not so much the NFL, but you don't really see it here. And when you do, even when it's successful, like I think about even like Antonio Pierce with the Raiders, most times they're not held on to. Like typically they don't do well, and so therefore they're just let go. But even in the times that they do, it's not too often that they keep the job. So the odds are to me still stacked against Kafka. I do probably think that there are some people in the Giant building that want to give Kafka a real shot. And look, and he deserves the opportunity, but you got to clean house. And hopefully Kafka can find an opportunity elsewhere. Look, this is for him, this is a great opportunity. Really, really is. But I want to talk about another thing, and it relates to John Mara. When there was 2 previous instances where they fired the head coach and kept the GM. 2015, where Tom Coughlin was fired and they kept on Jerry Reese. What happens? Jerry Reese is then fired 2 seasons later. Ben McAdoo becomes head coach. A successful first year where they actually make the playoffs. Year 2 is a disaster. Steve Spagnuolo actually takes over as interim head coach. And again, there's another example of an interim head coach in Spagnuolo who had ties with the Giants organization. Then, let go, because that's how it usually is. And Jerry Reese was fired. The other situation where it happened was Pat Shurmur after the 2019 season. He was fired, but Dave Gettleman was kept on. What happens? Joe Judge gets hired, and 2 seasons later, Dave Gettleman is let go. So if you want a little bit of a template, a little bit of a preview of what's to happen if Joe Schoen is kept on, there's a good chance that he will be fired no later than the end of the 2027 season. That is what happens here. It is not the right move to keep Joe Schoen. He needs to be fired. And so, while Brian Daboll being let go is the correct decision, he deserves to be fired. He is so not alone in this. And if anything, I blame Joe Schoen more than Brian Daboll. If we want, and I've made that pretty clear. If we want to go there, this is more of a Schoen issue. This roster sucks. And a lot of the stench, and look, it starts from up top, right? John Mara is the biggest problem here, but Joe Schoen is not too far behind him. And if he somehow makes his way to being the guy still come next season, I'm going to have a real hard time as a fan. I'll be rooting for the team to start, but as has happened many years, I mean, the Giants get up to such bad starts that I'm typically rooting against them very early, extremely early in the season. So that just happens regardless. But even further, if Joe Schoen is the general manager, it's going to be really hard for me to really truly support this team. And I'm always going to be a Giant fan. I'm always trying to root for what I feel is their best long-term success. That's why, for better draft picks and for people to be let go, it's all in the way of hoping. And again, my rooting doesn't affect what they do, obviously, but I just feel as if, you're going nowhere if he is still on board here. So I really hope that this thing, and look, I feel bad for people like Jackson. I don't want their failure. I hope that they have successes and the players on this team, they don't deserve, I mean, some of them do, some of them are bad and whatever, but it is so in the best interest of this team for it to get bad enough to the point where they have no choice but to let Joe Schoen go. And the one weird thing that I'll close with is Brian Daboll being fired now, in a weird way, you would think would actually give it a little bit of a chance that Joe Schoen is fired. Because what could have happened is they just kept everything the same, and then at the end of the year, they fire Brian Daboll, and that's the big move, right? That's the decision that was made. That's the thing. And then they just keep Joe Schoen. Now it leaves a little bit of runway. It leaves 7 more games of runway for there to be at least a chance. Because now obviously Brian Daboll was the big topical conversation. Now that all is directed at Joe Schoen, all of it, because there were a lot of people that were very anti-Daboll and pro Schoen. Now, no one's going to, Kafka's not going to be able to taste the heat. He's the interim head coach. It's all on Joe Schoen. So You would weirdly think that maybe there's a chance that this goes totally, totally south, which, I mean, it's already been terrible. How much worse can it get? That maybe smart minds, if they're there in that front office with ownership, say, hey, like, the right and prudent thing to do is to go in a totally different direction and clean house. Because I am telling you, as long as Joe Schoen, I hope I'm wrong. I'll gladly be wrong. But as long as he is the general manager of this football team, they are going nowhere. Doesn't matter how good Jackson Dart is. Joe Schoen has showed to be incapable of building a roster. And even Brian Daboll, like, I'll take it a step further. Brian Daboll got fired as head coach. Who wanted him? Who hired him? Joe Schoen. So add that to the list of negatives to Joe Schoen's resume. So now we're going to trust him to hire another head coach. That's going to work out any better? I highly doubt it. So again, big news here with the Giants. Brian Daboll out. Mike Kafka is now the interim head coach for the rest of the season. Everything else still in place. And we will now see what the last 7 games bring. I don't think a whole lot. And then I hope that there's other decisions made after the season's over, because, I mean, this organization's in a real rough spot. And hopefully this is the first of many, many dominoes to fall.